Okay, everybody, let's get started. So, today is the last day of class, at least the last day with new content. If any of you have the key terms, go ahead and open it. I was just thinking about this the other day. So you may remember the first day of class when I put it up on screen and scrolled through it, and I'm sure most of the terms looked, completely unintelligible. And now as you scroll through, hopefully for most of you, you now know a lot of these terms. Kind of cool to think back on how little you knew at the beginning of the semester. But yeah, so we are almost at the end. So here's the plan. For the first 20-ish minutes, I will finish the section on emotions. And of course, as always, feel free to ask any questions as I do so. Once we finish that, we'll do the review game. So I've never done this with a psych class. I have done it with reading and writing classes that I taught when I used to work in a place called Elite. Now only 12 people get to play. So I originally said 8, but only 12 people signed up, so I thought I'll make it work with 12. Shouldn't take too long. Now for those of you who are not playing, which is the vast majority, you will still be able to benefit from this because it will involve me putting key terms up here. I'll go ahead and say what the game is. Basically, the 12 will be put into pairs. Each of them will be given an eraser, whiteboard eraser. I spent like $2 on each. That's how committed I am to this class. And so they'll stand on either side. I will say something about the terms. It's only true of one of them, and whoever erases it first gets a point. If you erase one that's wrong, you lose a point. So that's not good for randomly guessing. And then we'll winnow it down until we get to the final 2. And then one person will get 1%. If the terms that I put up are unfamiliar to those of you who are not playing, maybe ask a question about those, or maybe check your notes later. So you can all benefit from this. And then after that, the remainder of class time will go to any questions that you have about anything in the book, because this Thursday there is a cumulative final. So in case you didn't know that. All right. So, we finished last time by talking about Paul Ekman. So I just have a few things to add about him. So remember that he's the one who argued that humans have universal basic emotions. And settle down, finish up your conversations. So he's the one who argued that humans have universal basic emotions. How many of you have seen this film, Inside Out? Not too soon. Oh, actually, okay, quite a few. Believe it or not, Ekman was a consultant on this movie. This is a little bit of a caricature, but it's essentially his view, that we have these kind of separate systems in the brain for different core emotions, each of which were separately designed by natural selection. The only one they're missing is surprise. Ekman thought that there were 6 emotions for which there was very good evidence of universality. He actually thought there were more than that, but there were 6 for which the evidence was especially strong. So on the screen there's 5. Fear, anger, happiness, sadness, and disgust. The 6th one for which he found good evidence was surprise. And the reason he argued that these were basic is that you find that people in very different cultures, even the highlands of Papua New Guinea, can recognize facial expressions associated with these emotions, even if they had no contact with the Western world. A related line of evidence for this view, the view that emotions, and in particular emotional expressions, are genetic and innate and given to us by evolution, is blind people. People who are blind from birth show the same facial expressions. So it can't be just learned through imitation. And interestingly, they show facial expressions that are very similar to their relatives, showing a strong genetic component that can't just be learned through visual imitation. Now, Ekman is not a genetic determinist. He does recognize that culture plays a role in emotional communication. One role that he mentioned in the video we saw last time, there are some things that are completely made up culturally. So like the various hand gestures, like this is good, this is bad, and other things are more bad that I won't do to the class. Although one time that I actually In grade 3, I didn't know what the middle finger meant. I didn't plan on telling the story, but it's kind of funny. We had this song called Three Little Candles that we would sing to the school, so I was like 8. And the song, which I won't sing, I'll just say the lyrics. One little candle burning bright, two little candles flickering light, and then you go through the candles, one for love, one for peace, and one for harmony. And I thought I'd be really clever if I had a different finger for each of the candles. So the candle for peace was, I fingered the whole school. So things like that are made up. Those are entirely culturally constructed. Additionally, though, even for the basic emotions that are universal, Ekman thought there was a role for culture, and the role was constructing what he called display rules. Display rules are rules about when it's appropriate to show various emotions, and when you're expected to kind of keep a stiff upper lip and hold back your emotions. And different cultures have different display rules. I forget the exact details, but there was a study comparing Americans and Japanese. And the study found that, because in Japan, especially when you're around an authority figure, you're expected to show less emotion. You're not supposed to be super expressive. And they measured this with experiments, and they found that indeed when Japanese people are in front of someone, especially someone in authority, they tend to show less emotion on their face. But if they're alone, if they're just watching a video, but there's a camera somewhere filming them, they show the same amount of expressiveness. So that's an example of how a display rule might affect emotional expression. And doing it in the situation where there's no person present shows that the basic emotional reactions are the same across cultures. What culture does is it shapes when it's appropriate to show different emotions. Okay, so this is the standard view now. In intro psych textbooks, Ekman is kind of the received wisdom. You do not need to know this for the test, but I will mention that there is a very influential critic of Ekman, Lisa Feldman Barrett. I would say that these two are probably the two most important emotion researchers today. Feldman Barrett is a neuroscientist. And Barrett argues very strongly against the view that there are these separate, distinct, basic emotions. Barrett thinks that even the emotions themselves are in large part socially and culturally constructed. She thinks that the only part that's innate is a kind of two-dimensional mapping of emotions. So kind of arousal and pleasantness, you could say, or valence. So arousal can go from high to low, and pleasantness can go from low to high as well. So a state that's high arousal but high pleasantness might be something like excitement, like being really excited about something. And something that's low pleasantness and low arousal might be like really sad and tired and depressed, right? That would be a state maybe here. So that part is innate, she thinks. But the particular features of emotions like disgust versus happiness versus anger, those are culturally constructed. She argues that there are cultures that don't have some of these. I listened to her explanation of Ekman's experiments in Papua New Guinea. I found them kind of to be a stretch, but she is a very influential researcher, and who knows, maybe in 20 years she'll be in the textbooks. So I mentioned that just as a potential point of interest, but as I say, for now, the kind of received wisdom in emotion research and intro psych textbooks is Ekman's view. That's all I have to say about Ekman. Any questions about him? Where's my eraser? The next thing we have to talk about that will actually help you a bit in social psych, if you take 105, is the relationship between arousal and performance. Arousal in actually the same sense that Feldman-Barrett means it. So arousal here doesn't mean just sexual arousal narrowly. It means any heightened state in which you have kind of more energy or you're more kind of alert. How high arousal it's optimal to have depends on how easy the task is. Okay. So for very easy tasks, you want kind of a moderate amount of arousal. So if we map out the relationship like this, so this is arousal, low to high, and this is performance. Whatever. So how good you do, the relationship is kind of like this. So so let's say it's a test, and let's say the arousal that we're talking about is how anxious are you? How fast is your heart going? How stressed out are you? And performance is how well you do on the test. Let's suppose it's a test you're pretty well prepared for. It's a fairly straightforward test. You want to be mediumly anxious. If you're not anxious at all, if you just don't give a shit, you're like, oh, whatever, it's a test. That's not good. If you're super stressed out, you'll fry your brain, you won't do so well. So what's optimal is to be kind of mediumly aroused. However, this effect changes a bit the more difficult the task is. If the task is more difficult, kind of less arousal is better. So the book adds some other stuff to that, but for difficult tasks, arousal is more likely to make you mess up. So you don't want to be as aroused if the task is really difficult. Here's an example that you'll talk about in 105, and that's social facilitation. So again, it's not something you need to know, but when people watch you do something, you get nervous, you get aroused, because you're a member of a social species. And if it's an easy task, that will kind of make you do better, right? So if people are watching you do something that's easy, that you have a lot of practice with, more arousal is kind of good, up to a certain point. I mean, if it's way too much, that's a problem. But a certain amount of arousal is good. But if they watch you do something difficult, you will not do so well. It will actually tend to make you get nervous and mess up. So that's one thing you'll talk about later. So being watched will help you if it's easy, but it'll hurt you if it's hard. Okay, any questions about this? I misspoke a little bit another way. When I said easy task, I think I said mediumly aroused. It's really like high arousal, but high up to a certain point. That there's such a thing as too much arousal, even for an easy task. For difficult tasks, maybe less arousal. So is that clear? Any questions about that? So you'll cover that more in 105. Okay. Last thing before the three theories of emotion. So the chapter ends with three kind of historically very important theories of what emotions are. But one quick thing that I have very little to say about is the facial feedback hypothesis. Very simple finding. If you are forced to express a particular emotion with your face, it can actually make you feel that emotion, at least to some degree. Kind of a fake it till you make it finding. Really simple study. You get people to read comic strips with a pencil on their face in a certain position. If they have the pencil in their face like this, right, so they have to go, kind of an unhappy facial expression, they actually find the comics less funny than if they have their face in this position. So if you bite down on the pencil, you're kind of forced to quasi-smile a little bit. And And this actually causes you to experience the comics as more funny. So that's a very simple example of the facial feedback hypothesis. Okay. So as I say, the last thing that we will talk about in this book is 3 theories of emotions. These theories are all a little bit out of date. I think it's kind of strange that the chapter ends with these, but they were all historically very influential. They're a bit like Freud, you know. The details are probably not right. What they all essentially do is they take different features of emotion and emphasize them, emphasize their role in creating emotions, but perhaps to the exclusion of other things that are important. The first one is the James Lang theory. Each of these are named after 2 guys. This is their last names. So William James and I think Carl Lang. William James, this is the same William James from chapter 1. So the James Lang theory says this: the physiological reaction comes first when it comes to emotion, and then you experience the emotion. This is a very counterintuitive view. When I say it, it will sound a little bit crazy. James and Lang argued that, so let's suppose I'm walking home, and a wolf comes up behind me. Presumably I'm going to feel fear, but the way James explains my experience of fear is my heart rate goes up first. Kind of all the physiological stuff. So my heart rate, my palms get sweaty, kind of all that stuff. And my awareness that's happening, oh, I have sweaty palms and a fast heart rate, that causes me to feel fear. So a bit of a strange view, but I mean, James did have some arguments for this, but so that was his view. For all of the emotions, there's kind of a physiological reaction that is a kind of signature of that emotion, and that's what causes you to feel the emotion. The second one is the Hammond-Bard theory. This one says that there is activity in the thalamus first. Remember, the thalamus does early sensory processing, kind of redirects the information to the cortex and to other areas. And as we saw, there is some evidence that the thalamus can do some early analysis of stimuli. And then it sends some information to the rest of the brain, which causes you to feel the emotion, and some information back to the body where the physiological reaction is caused. The key part of this theory is that the emotion and the physiological component happen at the same time. They are simultaneous. So that's different from James and Lang's view, which is that no, the physiological comes first. This view says no, they are simultaneous. One problem with both of these theories is that for many emotions, it's not clear that there is a distinct physiological signature. One way to maybe get the intuition for that is think about what happens in your body when you feel surprised. And now think about what happens in your body when you feel scared. Kind of similar, right? And that is borne out by the physiological studies. It's often very difficult to tell just by a simple heart rate measure or something which emotion someone is feeling. So these models seem to be a bit too simplistic. So the third one, third view, and maybe I'll do it over here, is the Schachter-Singer theory, also commonly called the two-factor theory. And this theory says that the physiological reaction and there's different things you can call the second factor. You can call it the interpretation, the cognitive label, different things like that. I'll just call it the interpretation, or construal, call it that. And those two together cause the emotion. So think again about the difference between being pleasantly surprised and being afraid. Let's suppose I'm walking home and I hear footsteps behind me. So my heart rate goes up, just like James and Lang said. Now, whether I interpret this heart rate as fear or being pleasantly surprised is going to depend on how I interpret the fast heart rate. So if I turn around and it's like a buddy, I'm going to interpret it as, oh, I'm pleasantly surprised to see my friend. If I turn around and it's a wolf, I'm going to interpret the same physiological reaction as evidence of fear. So that's the James theory, the Schachter-Singer theory. And there was one really interesting study done in Canada on this. This was done in BC, where I grew up. They had an attractive woman stand at the end of a bridge, but two different conditions. In one condition, the bridge was the Capilano suspension bridge. It was very high up, gets your heart rate going. In the other one, it was a low, solid, sturdy bridge that was not very fear-inducing or heart rate-inducing. And she would give men her number in kind of an indirect way at the end. And I'll show a video of this. Men on the high bridge were much more likely to call the woman afterwards. And the Schachter-Singer way of interpreting that is the fast heart rate is ambiguous. And what determines what it makes you feel is how you interpret it. So if there's like an attractive woman right there, you interpret it as attraction or being into this woman. So we'll watch a brief video reenacting that study, and then I'll say a bit more about this theory. Okay, so very cool study, kind of testing the power of this. And I'll say one thing in closing about this. This idea that interpretation can influence the emotions you feel is widely accepted today. Probably not something quite this simple, but the basic insight that Schachter and Singer had, that interpretation can influence how you feel, is really the whole basis of cognitive therapy. Right? The key insight of cognitive therapy is that changing your beliefs and your interpretations can influence how you feel. This is one of the most widely used and effective therapies out there. You will discuss more about it, or you'll discuss it more in 105. And again, another way of putting this is, I'm going to quote here my favorite psychologist, or my favorite therapist, who's Albert Ellis, one of the big players in the 105 therapy section. And his basic argument is that, look, the initial kind of feeling upset when something bad happens, that's unavoidable, that kind of initial aversive reaction. But becoming miserable or depressed, that's really a matter of how you interpret things, a matter of the stories you tell yourself, right? Saying things like, I must have this or else my life has no meaning or I'll be depressed. And the key strategy of cognitive therapy is to challenge those kinds of irrational beliefs that help to turn ordinary instinctive upsetness into being miserable. Ellis has a very cleverly named book, How to Stubbornly Refuse to Make Yourself Miserable. Kind of that's pretty on the nose for what he thinks. Now, I'm not saying that I think this is the final, ultimate, and only correct type of therapy. I don't think we know enough about mental disorders to have the correct therapy, but there is evidence that it is effective. A large body of studies, meta-analyses, and randomized controlled trials showing that it does significantly reduce various negative emotions. Okay, so that's kind of one practical consequence of this theory, and that is the last thing I have to say. I've now taught you everything I know about 104. So, any questions about the Schachter-Singer theory? Last thing I said. Yeah.
Can you just study proves the two-factor theory?
Perfect, yeah, good. So the two-factor theory, so there's two components that jointly create an emotion. You need both in order to have an emotion. So the physiological reaction is caused by the high bridge. So you have a fast heart rate caused by the bridge. Now, is that fear or is this attraction to this woman I'm looking at? Well, that's a matter of interpretation. So once the woman's there, you're more inclined to go, oh, this heart rate is because of her. That's how they would explain it. Now, you can be skeptical of that interpretation. Maybe you think there's some other way of construing it. I mean, one problem with the study is, as far as I know, it didn't have random assignment. It's whichever men happen to go on the high bridge or the low bridge. That could be a problem. But that's at least how someone like Schachter would interpret it. Yes.
Just going back to arousal and performance. Like, if you're doing something easy and you won't be so nervous versus like doing something hard, would it be like as a human thing that you do better when you're doing something hard versus easy, that you feel more rewarded after you do something, or like would you beat down on yourself after you do something bad just based on like the emotions afterwards, or is there like a difference?
Yeah, so that might be true, but I'm not sure it would explain the finding. And I apologize again for I misspoke twice during that thing. So just to say it again, just to remove any misinterpretation. Easy tasks, more arousal is good up to a certain point. Kind of independently of whether it's positive or negative. It's just a matter of how heightened your state is. If it's a difficult task, you don't want so much arousal. It might make you freak out or do badly. But as far as the influence of reward, I'm not sure how to connect to that. But any other questions? Okay, without further ado, we will do the game. So if your name is on this board, please come up. That's you guys. Good job. So what's your name again?
Arpit.
Arpit. Okay. So note to self, Arpit is the winner. And great. Now, in light of that game, does anyone have any questions about the terms that were up there or any other terms? Yes?
What is the function of the midbrain?
Good. So the function of the midbrain, it has a few functions. So quiet down, game's over. So one of the functions of the midbrain is it guides kind of automatic reactions to, it's not the only thing it does, but it helps with guiding automatic reactions to incoming visual and auditory stimuli. So it's not, the midbrain is not sophisticated enough to lead to conscious visual processing, but it can tell if there's like a bright light that flashes over. So think again of blind sight, right? Remember, blind sight, for these people, the visual cortex is damaged, so they don't have any conscious visual experience, but they can still, guide their behavior to some extent using vision. They don't really even know how they're doing it, but if you flash a light and ask them, where was the light, they can guess where it is. They think they're just guessing, but they're being guided by more rudimentary visual processing, including the midbrain. It does some other stuff. That's it. Other questions? Yep.
Can you explain what is memory consolidation?
Say again, sorry?
What is the memory consolidation?
Oh, that's just like kind of solidifying things into long-term memory, kind of storing them more strongly. So if the memory is consolidated, that means it's been successfully transferred to long-term. Yes? No. She asked, do you need to know the subcomponents of the central executive? And you do not. That's more just to prime you for future cognitive classes. Yes. The central executive, and quiet down please, is an important part of short-term memory. It's kind of your ability to concentrate on information, hold lots together, and work with it. Because short-term memory is what enables you to consciously work through problems. So if you're doing a math problem, you have to remember like step one and kind of go through it. That would be short-term memory. Okay. Any other questions? I saw some answer. Oh, yes.
What's the real position?
The serial position effect. So remember when I gave like a list of words that you all had to memorize, and then you try to remember as many as you can? What's generally found is something like this. So the words at the beginning, so order here means what order they were given to you in. You remember well. At the end, you don't remember so well. However, it only looks like this when you're tested immediately after. If you are tested later, you get something like this. I vaguely remember there may have been something on the test about this, so good question. Yeah.
Can you just go through signal detection theory and like a little chart?
Yeah, sure.
False alarm pitches, correct rejection.
Yeah, I don't think I taught correct rejection or that, but the main ones I want you to know are the errors. So, is there a stimulus present? And I forget if this is how the book does it. It may do it. It may switch the yes and the no, but it doesn't matter. But it's the same. So then there's kind of your decision. Or you could say what you say. Maybe it's weird to call it a decision, but there's what you say is true. So, think of an example. Let's suppose you're a doctor looking at a scan, and you're trying to decide if there's cancer or not. And then, so that's here. What do you say? Do you say there's cancer, or do you say there's not cancer? And in case you didn't hear, this person's asking me about signal detection theory. That's what this is about. So, if there is a stimulus present, and you say there is, so there is cancer, and you correctly say there's cancer, well then you just made the correct decision. I think, yeah, the book calls it a hit, but don't worry about that. If there's no cancer, and you say there's no cancer, again, you just made the right decision. The book calls it correct rejection. If there is a stimulus present, so there is cancer, the person does have cancer, but you say there's no cancer, that is a false negative. The falsehood having to do with what you said, right? You said there was no cancer, but there actually was. So false negative. If you say if there was no cancer there, but you say there is, really it's just like you're looking at it kind of funny. There really isn't cancer there. That's a false positive. So that's, I forget. I think, yeah, someone over here asked. Does that answer whoever's question this was? Yeah, okay. Other questions?
Could you explain why we like our family?
Oh, the kin selection? Yeah. And I don't want to pretend this is the only reason people love their family, but it's kind of the, think about the proximate versus ultimate distinction, right? So this is an ultimate explanation for why we love our family. The idea is kin selection, and the basic idea here is that genes which predispose you to be nice to your family will get passed on more, because your family shares some of your genes. So if a gene makes me love my kids or love my siblings or whatever, and do things for them, those genes are going to outcompete genes that don't make me love my or care for my family. Kin just means family. Other questions? Anything from 1 to 8 and 11. All right, so that is it. I will see you all at the test, and if I don't see you after the test, good luck with life. There is no written. It is 70 multiple choice.